of a feast, flooding. The concept of the flood has been projected for many seasons, whether it refers to the flood in the Bible or simply a flood, depending on one's perspective. The warnings have been clear. In Kemet, it was a local flood, one they feared deeply. For eons, the people of this region feared the fluctuations of the Nile River, as its variations were crucial to their survival. The Nile was the lifeblood of the people, and its seasonal flooding was a critical event. The people believed it was the pharaoh's responsibility to maintain the balance of creation, ensuring the river remained beneficial. If the Nile flooded too high, it destroyed crops and buildings. If it was too low, it led to food shortages. In other words, the flood could bring either a feast or famine. They believed that their adherence to the 42 laws of Ma'at provided them with a sense of security from these yearly cycles. In contrast, others believed that the flood mentioned in the book of Genesis, the flood that covered the entire earth, was of utmost importance. Some historians suggest that Noah's son Ham and his grandson Mizraim settled in Egypt, taking with them, in a paganized form, the memory of Noah's family and the Great Flood. But what does this have to do with us today? If we reflect on it deeply, the answer is revealing. Those who are wise have little difficulty observing the state of the world today. America is living in an illusion. Many are deceived into believing that the influential and wealthy are living in a land of feast, when in reality they too live in a state of famine that affects us all. Some are fearful, and in an effort to protect themselves, they hide behind masks, bracing for the flood that has already begun to overwhelm us. Behind the mask, regardless of one's race, creed, or color, anyone who can handle the truth will quickly recognize that America is becoming a land of total iniquity, from top to bottom. People are trading in their faith in God for the pursuit of wealth, control, and self-aggrandizement. Many wear masks to hide from the truth. Few can trust the Supreme Court given its clear corruption. The Senate and House have lost their independence, now fully tethered to the presidency. Criminals are often treated with more respect than law-abiding citizens. Leaders are now chosen based on the size of their bank accounts, regardless of how cruel or corrupt they may be. Some want us to believe that wealth is a sign of divine approval. Fortunately, I was not alive at the time of the biblical flood, or whatever version of the flood one chooses to acknowledge. However, I have been blessed to gain insight into these events through a portal I call a portal to antiquity. This portal is not exclusive to me. It is available to anyone who has the courage to understand who they are and where they come from. Through a diligent process of empirical investigation, as we study the past, it is clear that many in America have acted in ways that do not align with the values our ancestors held, especially the principles outlined in the 42 laws of Ma'at. Some may dismiss these laws as pagan or idolatrous. However, when read closely, these laws offer profound wisdom, especially on how humans should treat one another. They make no demands other than to please God, and anything beyond that is irrelevant. Discarding the sheets. For centuries, some have believed that through greed, power, and control, they could treat others however they wished, so long as they kept their actions hidden from the public eye. These individuals were foolish for thinking they could escape divine scrutiny. Still, they were clever enough to conceal their identities behind masks, bandanas, sheets, and other coverings, all to avoid being exposed. They were clearly disregarding God's will, or they simply did not care. Today, some are still deceived. They believe that their wealth and influence somehow sanctify their actions, equating physical prosperity with godliness. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. Through their deception, they have come to believe that they can now discard their masks, sheets, and bandanas, symbols that have hidden their misdeeds for centuries. Who spilled the beans? My childhood was filled with the presence of midwives, shamans, soothsayers, and yes, practitioners of voodoo, a belief that was taboo in those days but still practiced in secret. In fact, I was delivered into the world by a midwife, which was not unusual at the time, as medical care like Kaiser Permanente was not as prevalent. The times demanded that we find alternative ways to survive. This is why many black people still carry beliefs that cannot easily be discarded, regardless of how hard we try. We were raised in tight-knit communities where we listened to the wisdom of our elders, gathered around the fireplace in winter or the fan in summer. Perhaps this was for the best. One thing I know for sure is that most of my elders were always careful to tell us the truth, no matter how fanciful some of their stories might have seemed. When pressed, they would always come clean. My grandmother, who was a kind of pseudo-shaman, and others who practiced voodoo, often talked about the beans. They believed that one could capture another's spirit by knowing everything about them. They were optimistic people who saw good in almost everything. Perhaps this is why they endured slavery for so long. Some would praise the hearts of their masters. My mother even believed that her grandmother's masters were good people, and she would hear no other interpretation. It was sad, but eventually some people began to see the truth, and this is what they called spilling the beans. Once the beans were spilled, they believed they could somehow cast a spell upon those who had deceived them. I sometimes wonder if my elders were truly being honest, or if they too were deceiving themselves. But the memories of looking into their eyes still haunt me, as I am not sure they were lying. This remains a perplexing question for me, unveiling truth. Given my upbringing, it could be easy to assume that my thinking has been shaped or corrupted by my past experiences. Perhaps this is why I have devoted so much of my life to understanding exactly who I am and where I come from. Until recently, few records or documents were available to explain my story. This is why I have spent my life seeking out the correct documentation. My journey has led me to uncover information that contradicts much of what I've been taught in traditional history books. After studying the idea of the beans, I have come to see some truth in the story, although others may find it as strange as the tales my parents and grandparents told me. Through many different channels, I've discovered that our ancient ancestors, both here in America and in Kemet, believed that when one exposes themselves in a vile or inhumane way, there is power in channeling, harnessing, and converting their negative energy into something positive. However, they also caution that this power must be used for good, and only for good. But this is not the point I am trying to make in this post. The point. This is where I am heading. Wealthy and influential people today are no longer hiding their faces as they once did, even to their own chagrin. They have fooled themselves. It is eerie to watch them openly perform acts that go against everything our ancestors believed was an abomination to God. They speak of subjugating the poor and committing violence against other human beings, just as their misguided forebears did. But their ancestors were wiser. They knew to conceal their faces when they strayed from God's will, and from the wisdom of how our ancestors perceived God. Ma'at, the belief system of our ancestors, taught that when one does not please God, grief is inevitable. Many are now realizing that our ancestors were not as ignorant as once thought. Those who are wise understand that, contrary to popular belief, we are living in a time of famine, not feast, when a society discards part of its populace. The world can see what is happening, but many are too blind to act or even speak truth to power. Many of us know exactly what to do, and this time we can do it quietly, away from the public eye. No more confrontations in this season, it's obsolete. We ask you to join us mentally,